Welcome back then, everyone. We are back in the classroom. We are recording our session again. We're now going to look at learning unit number 8. That's the one that deals with salaries and wages. So yes, our session is being recorded, and these recordings will be shared. Please just check in with your lecturer where you can find the recordings. As I said earlier, when we begin a learning unit, when you do your revision on a particular learning unit, make sure you go through your learning unit outcomes and say to yourself, can I answer a question based on each of these outcomes? And remember, we are using last year's exam paper as the kind of a vehicle or structure for our revision today. And this is last year's exam paper question for learning unit number 8. And this was, in fact, a complete theory question. So that was a little bit of a different type of question from what we normally see for learning unit number 8. And that brings us to the next very, very important aspect of your preparation, and that is to please make sure you are studying your theory. Because remember, your theory is a key component to make sure that you're going to slay in our upcoming exam. What types of questions can you expect in theory questions? Remember, it can be multiple choice, it can be match the column, true or false, complete a sentence, write a short paragraph, write a short sentence. So those will be the kinds of theory questions that we can ask you. But the key point that I want to make is that one at the bottom of my slide. That remember, if you don't know your theory, you can't do your application questions either. So please don't think, oh, accounting theory is not very important. I'm going to leave that till the end. And if I have time, I'll quickly look at it. Just remember that if you don't understand your theory, for example, in Learning Unit 8, if you don't know what is a net salary or a net wage, or how do we calculate that, or how do we calculate UIF, then when it comes time to do your application questions, then you're also going to struggle to complete your application questions. So then, as we said, in 2024, the Learning Unit 8 question was really a full-on theory question. So again, please make sure you're studying your theory and that you can answer a theory question on any of the learning units. Then in 2023, just to show you a range of different types of questions out of this learning unit, in 2023, they asked a calculation type question. So this is your question from 2023. And as I said, I am including for you the full answers each time I reference a question. So unfortunately, in class, I don't have the time to work through every individual number, but you can this afternoon come back to our recording once you've had a chance to do these questions, and then you can come and check your answer. So in 2023, they asked the student to calculate the net wage for 1 week for one of the employees. And remember again, if you see the word calculate, which tip is going to come to mind immediately is our all-important tip number 3, and you are going to be showing those workings. Okay, so the minute you see anywhere in the required they talk about calculate, you immediately have to say, I must show workings. And this particular part of the question was for 12 marks. So if something counts 12 marks, then we certainly want to see much more than you just giving us a final answer. So you're definitely going to show us how you go about to calculate the gross wages and what deductions must be made from our employee to get to their net wage. That was another way in which we can test you on learning unit number 8. And then the most classic learning unit 8 question is the one where you are asked to prepare either a salaries journal or a wages journal. And an example of that type of a question comes from our 2021 exam. And in this question, the student was asked to prepare the wages journal. And here we actually had 4 different employees working in the business, and you were given quite a lot of information. So this one looks more like your classic textbook type question. And the student was asked to do the wages journal. So for today's revision, we're going to stand still a little bit longer on this question so that we can just talk again about some key aspects in this learning unit. So the first thing, remember, this learning unit deals with both salaries and wages. Salaries, remember, that is the one that is paid monthly. And so we will have 12 salary journals. We will have one for each month. Where on the other hand, your wages, that's the one that gets paid weekly. And it is a function of the number of hours that the particular employee worked during that week multiplied with their hourly rate. So that is how we're going to calculate the wages per employee. And so for the wages, then we are going to have a wages journal per week. So potentially we can have something like 52 wages journals, but for salaries, there'll only be 12 because there's only one per month. So when it comes to wage earners, then the first thing that we need to calculate is we need to work out the gross wages for the week. And the gross wages is normally made up out of the normal time and the overtime. And so in your question, the first thing you must look for in a wages question is how long is a normal work week? So somewhere in the question, we have to tell you that the normal work week is so many hours. And in this particular past paper question, the normal work week was 40 hours. So that's why you can see for our first 3 employees under the normal hours column, we use the 40 hours. For the last person, for Ahmed, we used 38 hours, which means that this particular employee didn't work a full week. They only worked 38 of the possible 40 hours. Then any hours in excess of that normal work week, so any hours that they worked more than 40 hours, that is then what becomes the overtime hours. And then we will apply the overtime rate to those hours. And then if you add your normal time and your overtime together, that then gives you the gross wages for your employees. Once you've calculated the gross wages, then we need to go and have a look at what will be deducted from our employees' wages or their salaries. And remember again, in your textbook, they make a distinction between what we call mandatory deductions. And those are the deductions that has to be made by law. And there is your UIF and your SDL, and you pay as you earn. And then there are the voluntary deductions. So those are the ones where the business will decide what else needs to be deducted from the employees. So there we think about things like pension fund, provident funds, medical aid, staff funds, trade unions. Those are all the voluntary ones, which the law is not prescriptive about those deductions. So then the deductions, we will then put those all into the table, and then we'll get the total deductions. We'll subtract the total deductions from the gross wages, and that will give us the net wages. Once we've calculated the net wages, we are going to look at what is the employer contributing. The employer is contributing to the UIF, to the SDL, and in this particular question, the employer also made a contribution towards the retirement savings, with other words, the pension fund, for each of the 4 employees. So in a question like this, when we talk about these deductions, your pay as you earn, and remember that's your monthly income tax, that number we will always give you in the question. Okay, so you need to just go and check in the question. We will always give you the pay as you earn deduction that has to be made from each of the employees. The UIF deductions, those ones we'll always expect you to calculate. So here we will expect you to know that it is 1% and that it is 1% of the UIF remuneration. And in the question, we have to give you the UIF remuneration, and you just have to multiply it with that 1%. STL, we'll also expect you to know how to calculate STL. And again, that is 1%, but this time it's 1% of the STL or pay as you earn remuneration. And again, we have to give you the remunerations. You just have to know that you need to do 1% of each of those numbers. It is important that you must know the difference between UIF and STL. Remember again, UIF is for staff members that become, or employees rather, that become temporarily unemployed. They can then go to the unemployment insurance fund, and then they can go and claim money there to support them while they are unemployed. It's essentially 2% because 1% the employee will contribute and 1% the employer will contribute. There is a maximum threshold. I'll show that to you in the next slide. And it's for employees that worked more than 24 hours in a month. STL, this one is to help with the shortage of skilled labor. It's 1%, but this time around, it's only the employer. So if we look back here, you'll see STL was only sitting there under the employer's contribution, where UIF was shown under the employee and the employer's contribution. This one, there's no threshold, and that is if the business is going to pay salaries and wages of more than 500,000 rands over the next 12 months, then they need to contribute to STL. Your UIF threshold is for a salary or for a wage of 17,712 rands per month. And please, if you are using older versions of the textbook, or even if you are attempting at home very old versions of past papers, then you may still come across the older threshold that was previously used before the 1st of June 2021. Please don't get confused with those other numbers. The correct number and the one that we will assess you on in the exam is 17,712 rands. Just another little exam tip. When you calculate your UIF, remember your UIF for the employee and for the employer will be exactly the same amount because both of them are 1% of UIF remuneration. So just another time-saving tip, you're going to calculate your UIF only once, and then you're going to just copy it over into the second column, because if you look at those two yellow columns up on your screen now, I hope it's showing up. It's not looking so clear, but if you can look at the two yellow columns, those are your two UIFs, and you can see the numbers are identical. So you're certainly not going to waste time by recalculating the employer's contribution to UIF. Your things like your pension funds, your staff funds, your medical aid, those numbers will always be based on the question. Okay, so for your pension fund, your staff fund, your medical aid, even your trade union contributions, there you would have to look in the question and you would have to understand in the question what are they telling you for those types of deductions. Then, when we've prepared or completed this journal, we need to post the journal to the general ledger. So we need to get the totals from this journal to the general ledger. So here on this slide, I'm just showing you where you are going to post each of these totals in the general ledger. I've also got some more detailed slides on this. So this one is just a quick summary at a glance, just to remind you of where all these different numbers are going to go. But I have got some more detailed slides on that. Maybe just to quickly see, panel, is there anything you want to add at this stage? Bomkazi, maybe we can, this time around, we can begin with you. Is there anything that our panel members just want to add for our students? Evidence or Salama, anything from your side that you maybe want to add for the students?
I think, can I just quickly try to answer some of the questions because I'm struggling to keep up. Okay, someone asked why is the UIF 36 rand if the gross wage is 3,000 rand? Please remember the gross wage is not the same as the UIF remuneration. So UIF is calculated on the UIF remuneration, not necessarily the gross salary or gross wage. I think I should be correct in that. Then I think that was the one that I was left with. Yeah. There's someone asking about question papers being left out. I don't understand if you mean the question papers that are left after the exam has taken place. But if you want past papers, you can find the past papers on your current students, be it VC current students, RC current students, under the tab that's written past papers. So that's where you find the question papers. Then you just go under the A folder, then you look for your module code, which is ACBP 5121. Thank you for that, Ina.
I think also, I wonder if the student were asking whether we find sometimes students can't complete a paper. Yes, we do sometimes find that students struggle to finish their exam papers. And that's why we're stressing so much this morning in the session that time management is your key, so that you can make sure that you can actually complete your paper, because sometimes students do let the time run away from them a little bit, and then they end up not having enough time to finish some of the last questions. Okay, so we said this slide then shows us how to post this journal, the wages journal, to the general ledger. But I also just want to show you some individual general ledger accounts, just again to make sure that you know exactly how you're going to post this journal into the general ledger. Okay, so the first one that I want to show you is our wages expense account. And remember, again, this is an expense account. So if we use our little dead click acronym, and I also saw in the chats, someone else was saying they use another little acronym that someone has taught them. Of course, if you maybe had accounting at school, or your lecturer has given you another way to remember this, and it works for you, then I don't want to confuse you today. The one that I kind of like and I always share with my students is the one where I say dead click, which means we debit expenses, assets, and drawings. So we're going to put the opening balance and the increase on the debit side for an expense account. So your wages expense account is then an expense to the business, and the number out of the journal that we're going to post to this account is the gross wages. And this is very important that you have to remember this, because you're going to see in a moment, we also post net wages. And so that can become a little bit confusing. So remember now the gross wages. So before any deductions, that number is the one that we're going to put into the wages expense account. Then the net wages also gets posted to the general ledger, and they get posted to a liability account. And liability accounts increase on the credit side. So you can see the net wages are sitting on the credit side of that creditors for wages account. And this net wage, remember, that is the amount that we actually going to pay to our employees. So in this case, those 4 employees that we have, this is the amount of money that they're actually going to get in their bank account at the end of this particular week. So you can see there's a difference between the gross wages and the net wages. And the difference between these two numbers, that is actually all your deductions. Okay, so that's the difference that is between these two numbers. This is when we talk dead click, and I know I always say I kind of I borrow this slide from Salama because she always has such a lovely slide to explain dead click. So this is what we mean by it. So we mean assets, expenses, and drawings increase on the debit side, and they decrease on the credit side. And we said the wages expense was an expense account, so you can see where that fits in. And the creditors for wages, that's the liability account. So that's the one that increases on the credit side. And that's the one where we use CLICK. And for the expenses, we use the DEAD acronym. Then the other one I just want to specifically highlight are the things like the pension fund contribution account versus the actual pension fund account. So in this question, then you'll remember the employee contributed towards their pension fund and the employer also contributed to the pension fund. So when we start posting these numbers to the general ledger, to our expense account, the one that we call pension fund contribution account, there we're going to post the amount that the employer is contributing. And you can see I've highlighted it nicely for you in that sort of a blue color to show you where did I find that 2,200 rands that I've placed in this account. This account is also an expense. So this account is an expense to the business because the business is contributing towards the retirement of this employee. And so the entry goes on the debit side. But there's also a liability account. There's the actual pension fund account. So when it comes to things like medical aids and pension funds, the amounts are deducted from the employees and it's then paid over to an outside company. There are companies outside that specialize in things like medical aid and retirement funds. So for example, there's Discovery. They are a big medical aid provider. There is Momentum. They provide medical aid. So the pension and the medical aid is paid over to these businesses who specialize in medical aids and in pension funds. And so this account here, this soft pension fund, this is that outside company. And we are going to pay this 3,300 rands to this company. And then once our employees then retire, they will then go to the soft pension fund and ask for their monthly amount, that the monthly pension that they are going to get. So please make sure you see the difference. This one is the liability account and the actual pension fund contribution, only the employer's part, that is your actual expense account. So please just make sure that you see which numbers to use in these two different accounts. Then another account, a general ledger account that's new to Learning Unit number 8, that is our so-called EMP 201 control account. And when you look in your textbook, you will see they actually show you what the EMP 201 return looks like. And that is a return from the receiver of revenue that the business is going to complete once a month. and then they're going to make a payment to the receiver of revenue, and the 4 amounts, or rather 3 amounts that they have to pay over to the receiver of revenue is the UIF, the STL, and the pay as you earn. And for that, we create another liability account. It's called the EMP 201 control account. And you can see in that account there on the credit side, I have posted in there 4 amounts. It's the two UIFs, the STL, and the pay as you earn. And please just take particular note that the details that we use for the 2 UIF amounts are different. So please remember again, when you prepare yourself for the upcoming exam, please be very detailed orientated. Please make sure that when it comes to things like this, you make sure you see in your textbook when you do your revision that for the UIF from the employee side, the details will be the wages expense account. And for the UIF from the employer's side, we will use an account called UIF contributions. So please make sure you take note of all these little details as you do your revision. Then at the end of the month, all those amounts for UIF, pay as you earn, and STL that we have been calculating in the different journals throughout the month, we then pay that amount over to the receiver of revenue. And if you look there on the debit side of the slide, then you will see I've made that payment. The payment, of course, is done through Cashbook Payments. The details for it will be bank, and I pay over the full amount to the receiver. In Learning Unit 8, there are also different questions that actually shows you how to prepare the Cashbook payments and how to make the payments to either the salaries creditors or the wages creditors. Now, we didn't look at that specifically in our revision this morning, but please remember to also include that in your revision for the upcoming exam. So this again is just a quick summary of the different types of questions out of this learning unit, and where you can go and look in your textbook for similar exercises. Today, we mostly spoke about wages questions because in the past paper questions that I quickly pulled up, they were all wages type questions. But remember, you also need to be able to do everything for salaries. So you also need to be able to do a salaries journal, the salaries general ledger accounts, be able to pay your salary creditors, and that EMP 201 return. Okay, panel, how is it going out there? Is there anything you want to add for our students, or any questions that you saw coming up in the chats that you think you just need to talk to our students about?
Nothing from my side, Ina.
Thank you, Bomkazi, Salama, and Evidence. I know you are super busy replying to all the chats. I can just see your answers coming up in the chats, but do you have maybe a moment just to share some of your insights with the students?
Hi, Ina, maybe just what Evidence also mentioned earlier, especially for this learning unit again, we will need the students to show their workings because we do allocate marks for that, especially in learning unit 8. And I think also maybe we just need to give a reminder regarding how the UIF is calculated, because I think we have a student again, she's not sure how we got to that 36 Rand. And if you can just go back to the actual question, maybe then she'll have the actual question in her. Okay, we know with the UIF remuneration, That's it. Okay, Ntuthuko. Okay, this is how we got to the 1% for UIF. Okay, we're not calculating it on the gross wage, is on the UIF remuneration amount that is given to you. Okay, and as Ina mentioned earlier, that most of these amounts will be given to you. You just need to then do your 1% calculation from that. Okay. I hope that answers her question, because I think she wasn't sure why you got to 36 and not 30. Very important again is with regard to the T accounts, yes, of course, the debt click rule. And I just just remind the students, whatever you have to pay to SARS, okay, we know that is a very popular exam question, the EMP 201. So always just remember what you pay to SARS is the pay as you earn, the UIF and the SDL. And UIF, both employees and employers contribution. Okay. Right, so just please remember that. And maybe just the earlier slide, with regard to the double entry. So it's very important if they could just study that both for the debtors and, sorry, for the wages and salaries, just study the double entry accounts. Okay, we've covered this in previous learning units with regard to learning unit 4 and 5. All your journals have double entries. So if you can just memorize that also, then it will help you to know when you have to post to the general ledger which account to debit and credit. Okay, all the best. Thank you. Thank you, Ina.
Great. Thank you, panel. Thank you for all your input. I think it's very valuable to our students. Students, I think just let us know you're still there. Send us a quick emoji to just show us that you're still out there and that you're still okay. Okay, I'm seeing some little anxious faces coming up in the emojis, but I'm hoping that by the end of these 3 hours, there'll be more happy faces. Oh, there we go. Oh, a few more anxious faces. Oh, no, no, no. Okay, great.
Okay.
Thanks, students.
Hi, Ina.
Salama,
I think one
yes?
student just want you to go back again to that UIF threshold slide. If you can just maybe go back to the actual question of the activity. Yes.
Is this the slide, Salama?
Cornelie, are you happy with this slide? Is this the slide you're referring to?
We trust the student has seen the slide. I think I need to just move on just for the sake of time. Okay, so the next topic we're going to cover this morning, and let me just get my slides lined up. Then in our quest to slay our ACBP 5121 exam, then the next learning unit that we need to pay some attention to is learning unit number 7. And this learning unit is then where we look at how do we record the individual data and the individual creditor. And in your textbook, your Accounting 1A textbook, you can look at pages 212 to 228. And then just, sorry, I keep just reminding everyone, yes, we are being recorded, and please check in with your lecturer where you can find the recordings. And remember also, the revision we did for semester test 1 and 2, those recordings are still available. So if you need some more detailed revision on those learning units, then please go and rewatch those recordings. So this is what we can expect of you in learning unit number 7. So as always, read through these outcomes and say to yourself, can I answer a question based on each of these outcomes? Now, as we said, learning unit 7 then looks specifically at debtors and creditors. In Learning Unit 5, we also looked at debtors and creditors. So Learning Unit 5 and 7, they do kind of sit together, because in both of these learning units, we look at how to record credit transactions. In Learning Unit 5, we look from the perspective of our total debtors and creditors. And then when we come to Learning Unit 7, we look at our individual debtor and creditor. But before we can start looking at the accounting side of it, we must make sure that we can define and that we know for ourselves what is a debtor and what is a creditor. So a debtor is a person or a business that owes money to the sole trader. How does a debtor originate? A debtor comes from a credit sale. So when the business sells something on credit, with other words, we're selling it to you now, but you only have to pay us later. That is how we get a credit. How we get a debtor. A debtor is always classified as a current asset, and therefore debtors must always have a debit balance. And just another reminder, your total amount for your debtor will be the amount that includes VAT. And that's a very important aspect to remember for your learning unit number 7. Now, you'll remember that tip number 4 said, make sure you know your theory, and that's how we're going to slay in our exam later this week. And here you can see once again, in last year's exam paper, here again is a theory question, and they're asking our students to explain what is a debtor. And here you can see we use the words in your own words. So here you have the freedom to say what you understand under the term debtor, but you can express it in your own words. Where you will remember earlier when we looked at that Learning Unit 9 theory question, there we were very specific and we said we're looking for the IFRS definition. So just make sure in these theory questions, are we saying it's okay, just give it to us in your own words, or are we looking for something very specific that comes from your textbook? So just make sure you are giving us exactly what is being required of you. And that's our tip number 2 and 4, really. 2, remember, says read your required nicely, and 4, know your theory. Now, we've just looked at what is a debtor. So now let's see what is a creditor. So a creditor is now someone that the business owes money to. And how do we get a creditor? A creditor comes from a credit purchase. So now the business this time have bought either inventory or other items on credit, and they are going to pay the creditor in some point in the future. A creditor is always a current liability, so it will have a credit balance. And again, your VAT must be included in your creditor's balance. So in 2024, they gave the students this question. That was question 3.6, and they asked the student to prepare the debtor's ledger based on the set of information that was given to the student. Now, before we can jump in with a Learning Unit 7 questions, there are certain terms that we have to make sure that we fully understand. Because if you don't understand what we mean by each of these terms, then it is not going to end well for you in the different exam questions. So the different terms that we need to understand, and they straddle Learning Units 5 and 7, is, do you know what is a debtor's control account? Do you know what is a debtor's ledger? And do you understand what is a debtor's journal? So that if we asked you to prepare any of those, you will immediately know what you need to do. Because obviously, if we're asking you, like in this question, to do a debtor's ledger, and then you go and you do the debtor's journal, then obviously you won't be getting any of the marks. So it's really key that you need to understand these 3 terms and what do we mean by them. So let's have a look. If I'm talking Data's Journal, I'm talking Learning Unit 5. And a Data's Journal looks something like the journal that's on your screen right now. So this is typically what a Data's Journal looks like. And remember, in this journal is where we record the credit sales of inventory. Okay, remember the Data's Journal is for credit sales of inventory. And if you want to go and revise how to prepare a Data's Journal, you can either look at your example 5.1 or your question 6.7. Also remember again, in the Data's Journal, the column that says Data's Control, that's the one that's going to include your VAT. And your sales column, that is the one where the numbers are going to be excluding VAT. So again, this is where you're going to use your Learning Unit 3 knowledge of how do I get to my numbers excluding VAT. So once we've prepared this Data's Journal, so we're now doing this per month. So at the end of the month, we've completed the Data's Journal. Now we're going to take our Data's Journal and we're going to post it. And we're actually going to post it to 2 different places. So we're going to post it to our Data's Ledger, and we're going to post it to your Data's Control account in the General Ledger. When we post to the Data's Ledger, we're going to post the individual transactions from the Data's Journal or from any of the journals. And when we post to the Data's Control account in the General Ledger, now we're going to post totals. Okay, this is a very key distinction that you have to remember. So when we post to the Data's Ledger, we're looking for individual transactions with that data. And when we post to a General Ledger Control account, then we're just interested in the totals. So what does the Data's Ledger now looks like? And this is now where Learning Unit 7 then comes in. And your Data's Ledger looks like this. And here we have an account per individual data. So you can see in my example on your screen now, we have 3 datas, 1 Bishu suppliers, 1 Mpingeni, and 1 Machine retailers. So we have 3 datas and we have an individual account for each of them, and that is our Data's Ledger. And if you want to do, obviously, revision questions on the Data's Ledger, then you will go to your Learning Unit 7, and there you will find 7.2, 7.9. Those are nice questions on preparing a Data's Ledger. The Data's Control account, this is the one that we find in the General Ledger. And in this one now, you can see this is where we've captured the journal totals. Okay, so in here, if we look at my Data's Control account, I can't see the names of any datas. I can't see any information around specific datas. All I can see here is my total credit sales, my total sales returns. So I can only see the totals of the transactions that took place during the month. And again, you can go and have a look at that all-important example 5.1 if you want to have another look at a Data's Control account. Then at the end of the month, there's actually one more that we just need to look at, and that's the Data's List. And your Data's List is like a little trial balance for datas. So we're going to write down the names of all of our datas, and we're going to write down their balances at the end of the month. And those balances you will get out of your Data's Ledger. And then the total of your individual datas must equal the balance of your Data's Control account in the General Ledger. So the individual datas must be equal to the total datas. And that is then what we will see from our Data's List. Possible questions. Now, my slides today, we're looking very much at datas, but in Learning Unit 7, we deal both with debtors and creditors. So you need to be able to answer all of these questions for both, for debtors or for creditors. And as you can see here, I'm giving you a list again of all the possible questions that you can practice. And I've also just shown you a kind of additional questions that you can add on to each of these questions to make sure that you kind of practice everything on the topic of debtors or on the topic of creditors. And while we're talking about creditors, obviously for creditors, you also need to make sure that you know what is a creditor's control account. Remember, that's the one that will be in the general ledger that's made up from the total creditors. What is a creditor's ledger? That is your individual record per creditor. And then our creditor's journal, that is the one where we're going to record all credit purchases. So just like for debtors, you also have to make sure that for creditors, you are very clear in your mind, what do we mean by each one of these terms? And as I said, it is sitting between your learning units 5 and your learning unit 7. But to bring us back now, we've actually had a long discussion, but what we really wanted to look at was this question from the 2024 exam. So in the 2024 exam, the student then were asked to do the debtors ledger. And we've now said that in our mind now we understand, okay, debtors ledger, I'm looking now for the individual debtor. So I just wanted to take us one step back again. So our debtors control account, this is the one in the general ledger. And here we know that for a debtor, the increase must be on the debit side and the decrease is on the credit side. So when we now talk debtors ledger, our layout looks a little bit different. So you can see here when we're working in the debtors ledger and we write up transactions with individual debtors, we have a slightly different layout from the general ledger. In the general ledger, we have that classic T account with a debit side and a credit side. Where in our debtors ledger, we have a debit column and a credit column. But these columns work just the same as the sides in the general ledger. So a debit for a debtor is still a plus. So whether we're talking about the debit side in the debtors control account in the general ledger, or we are talking about the debtors ledger, the debit is the plus and the credit is the minus. And if we look back at our debt click, we know that assets and a debtor is, remember, it's a current asset, increases on the debit side and decreases on the credit side. And that remains true whether you're working in the general ledger with your debtors or whether you're working in the debtors ledger. So that is an important reminder. And I would say before, if this was your exam question, I would make a little plus above the debit and a little minus above the credit, just to remind myself where's the increase, where's the decrease. Then the next thing we want in our debtors ledger is the next column we're interested in is that document number column. Now, typically the heading says document number, but we are actually looking for document names and document numbers. So in your question, if they give you the document name and number, we are looking for both, and we will actually give you marks for both. In this particular question of last year, they actually didn't give us document numbers. So in last year's question, we didn't get the document number, and therefore we couldn't add it to this column. But please check your exam question. Also for creditors, if this was the creditors ledger, we're looking for document names and numbers. And a reminder again, how will I know which document is matched up with which transaction? And another very important page in your textbook is this page 107. Of course, these page numbers are referring you to the current year's version of the textbook. If you're using older versions of the textbook, you might have to just page around a little bit to make sure you get the right pages. This is the first page of Learning Unit 4 in the textbook. And in this, on this page, and you can see I've got my bright yellow arrow there in place. This is the page that shows you which source document gets matched up with what type of transaction. And it even goes as far as telling you whether it will be an original or if it will be a duplicate. So please, this is also a key page to include in that revision for our upcoming exam. Right, so now we've got our document numbers in. The next column that we get to is for our folios. What do we mean again by folios? By folios, we mean in which journal did you find this transaction? And when we talk debtors, we're really talking about four journals. We're talking about the debtors journal for the credit sales. We're talking about the debtors allowances journal for sales returns. We're talking about cash book receipts for when your debtor pays you. And we're talking about the general journal for things like settlement discounts, credit losses, or interest that's being charged to the debtor. And so often students leave out the folio column, and that unfortunately ends up then costing them quite a few marks in an assessment. So here, 2, 4, 6, 7. So here was 7 folios that the student had to provide. So that could have been anything between 3.5 to 7 marks, depending how the marks were allocated. So please do not throw away the easy marks in a question. There's nothing easier than just adding in your folios when you do any ledgers, whether it's general ledgers or your debtors and creditors ledgers. Please add in your folios, and by folios I mean the abbreviation of the journal where the transaction was recorded. Again, we're not going to tell you in which journal do we record credit sales. We expect by this point you know that. And again, if you come back to this page 107, here we actually tell you what type of transaction sits in each journal. So we expect you now at this stage of your studies to know that, for example, credit sales will be the debtors journal. So you must be able to provide these folios from your own knowledge. Then we put in the amounts, and the amount will go either in the debit or the credit column. So not in both. Your amount can only sit in one of the two columns. And it will be in the debit column if it's going to increase the balance of the debtor, and it's going to be in the credit column if it's going to decrease the balance of the debtor. And remember again, all of these amounts will be including VAT. And if you look, for example, at that transaction on the 16th of May, you can see in the question, they actually gave you the sales amount excluding VAT. And so you had to remember, oh, hang on, I still need to add VAT to that number. So you have to remember, we mustn't catch you out that easily. You must say, hang on, I see what you're doing here. I know I have to still add the VAT to it. So all of these amounts then must be inclusive of VAT. And then the last thing you do is you calculate your balance. And in a debtors and in a creditors ledger, we calculate the balance after every single transaction. Okay, often we see students just leave that column blank, or they'll do the first balance and maybe the last one. But remember, we're looking for a balance after every single transaction. So you are going to be calculating that for all of the transactions. Then our top tip number 3, and I wonder if you can all remember what is top tip number 3. It is show us your workings. And you can actually see in this question nearly all of the transactions was accompanied by some kind of a calculation or some kind of a working. So please, it doesn't matter what the nature of the question is. If there is a calculation that you have to make, for example, in the first one, you had to calculate interest. In the next one, you had to add on the VAT. Then there was a trade discount on the 27th. And on the 31st, there was a settlement discount. So in all of those instances, you as the student had to make calculations, and please, you are not going to forget to show your calculations in the paper, because remember, again, if we want to slay in this exam, we are going to be showing our workings. Panel, that's all that I wanted to say on learning unit number 7. Sorry, just before I hand over to my panel, just remember, students, that you need to know Learning Unit 7 both for debtors and creditors. I have now only covered the debtors side in my presentation today, but please, you also need to make sure you do the same revision for the creditors. Okay, panel, would you like to just add in your comments here for our students?
Can you please just go back to that very first page of Learning Unit 4? I see a lot of students are still asking what DJ stands for, what the folio is actually used for. I just want to quickly just try to maybe repeat that. Okay, if it's not necessarily that clear because there's that P107 in the middle, but if those of you that were still struggling can just look at the bottom part. Okay, it moved. If you can just look at the bottom part, I'll use that as an example. So it says name of journal, that is the column. The name of the journal is written as creditor's journal. Then under the abbreviation, we abbreviate the creditor's journal as CJ. Then what type of transaction would be in the creditor's journal? It's a credit purchase when the business is buying something on credit. Then the source document is also provided. We would actually be working from an original credit invoice. So if you were recording a transaction that is either coming from the creditor's journal or relates to us buying something on credit, in the folio that says fall, whether you are in the actual well, you wouldn't necessarily be in the creators control, but whether you are in the, actually, yeah, in the creators control T accounts, under the fall column, if you are recording anything that is coming from the creators journal, the fall would be CJ. And then same thing applies for when you are recording in the individual creditors account. Maybe we purchased on credit. So that means under document, you would have said original credit invoice. Then in the fall column again, it would say CJ. So basically the CJs, CHJs, DJs are abbreviations of the names of the journal. So those of you that are still struggling with that, please, please, please study that very first page of Learning Unit 4. Hopefully that clarifies for some of them.
Thank you, Evidence. Bomkazi and Salama, have you got anything you'd like to add for our students?
I don't have anything to add, Ina. Sorry, Salama.
Okay, not a problem. Hi, Ina. Maybe if you can just go back to the actual question. You know, if you could go back to the past exam paper question. Okay, yes. Now, okay, the most important thing I always tell my students, which I've also picked up, you know, from past, you know, when we're marking the exams, is they should really highlight that opening balance. So when they start reading, not to forget to look if there's an opening balance, so that, you know, the amount that is owing there. And for me, because what you've just mentioned now regarding debtors, there's a plus and a minus. Actually, for my students, I tell them that when they're reading the transactions, they should already on their question paper put their pluses and minuses, and hopefully that will help, that will guide them as to where they need to record that now in the debtors ledger. So if they're doing the first transaction where they're going to calculate the interest, then they should already know that that is going to increase the debtors balance, so that is a plus. So if they're going to write a plus there, they know they have to put that in the debit column. And then with the transaction on the fourth inner, where they're going to be settling the outstanding balance, they must already have the understanding that the balance of the debtors will decrease here with this transaction, so it must be a minus. So these are just little tips I give my students that they can do on the question paper. Put your pluses and your minuses, and hopefully that will guide you as to where you're going to record it on in the debtors ledger. And when you calculate the balance, you need to know you're going to add or subtract. I hope that will help. Thank you, Ina.
Great, thank you very much, panel. That wraps up then our revision on learning unit number 7, and I think everyone needs a quick leg stretch. Sorry, Evidence, I see you've got something more to add. Do you want to jump in?
No, just to quickly answer someone, because I was going to try and type and I feel like it will take forever. In terms of the debit and credit side, each and every general ledger account, when we're talking about a general ledger, it's the T account. Each and every general ledger account has a debit and a credit, but the debit or the credit does not necessarily say it's an increase or a decrease. What determines the increase or decrease is what element does the account fall under? Is it an asset, an expense, a liability, an income, drawings, or capital? So depending on where it falls, if it's an asset, then all your assets would be increasing on the debit, decreasing on the credits. So the debit side basically says left-hand side of a general ledger, credit side means the right-hand side of the general ledger account. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a really excellent point, students. Excuse me. You have to make sure that you remember which accounts increase on which side. So a debit doesn't always mean an increase, and a credit doesn't always mean a decrease. We'll talk a little bit about that in our next session, where we're going to do our revision of learning units 1 through to 6, and we're going to look specifically at posting to the general ledger. And then again, we will talk about your general ledger accounts and your debit and your credit sides. I think we all need a little break, a little leg stretch. Again, if you don't mind, if we can just keep it to 5 minutes so that we can make sure we get everything covered that we've got planned for the morning. So on my side, it's now 11:01. And as I always say to my students, we've got to synchronize watches now, students. So 11:06, we will jump in. We'll start the class again at 11:06. So if you can please be back in the venue then. Also, just if you haven't done so yet, please remember to sign our attendance register. And then we will be back 11:06 to cover learning units 1 through to 6.